On September the 6th, 1987, Dr. Benjamin Carson, a black man, did something that no other doctor had ever done in the history of medicine. He was the lead pediatric neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and he led a team of people who separated conjoined twins. They had been conjoined by the back of their heads, which is very dangerous, and 23 other doctors had failed. They had tried and failed. The twins would either die, one would die, or both would die, but they were not successful. But this black man, Dr. Benjamin Carson, led that team and they separated these twins, and the twins survived. And the only reason why these twins might have suffered is because they did not have the adequate care they needed after the surgery. Understand, I think the father got on drugs and became an alcoholic. The mother became destitute, and the boys were eventually institutionalized. I think one of them is actually still alive, but a black man led this team of doctors. That same black man, though, however, wrote in his autobiography, Gifted Hands, that he had once almost stabbed a student. Well, he did stab a student, but by the grace of God, his classmate was not injured or killed because the knife hit, I think, the belt buckle. So God would have the same man who at one point talked about his anger and how he would throw rocks and he was violent and he was filled with a lot of anger. How this same man, God used those hands that had been used to hurt people. This is what Dr. Carson shares in his book. Use those hands to save people. And I want you to think about that because Dr. Carson says that after the incident where he almost stabbed his classmate, he began to reflect on his life. And he knew that if he had hurt that classmate or killed that classmate, he would have gone to prison and, so many bad things would have happened. And God saved him. So he began to read the book of Proverbs and how it changed his life. And from that moment on, he learned how to manage his emotions. I want you to think about what just happened, the verdict that was just given with the Carmelo Anthony case. And this is a very sad lose lose situation. You have one young man who is dead, you have another one who is now incarcerated in prison. And the thing that I want to focus on, and I'll be asking some questions throughout this episode. The thing I want to focus on is how do we stop this from happening in the future? How can we minimize our the chances of our young people, young men especially, ending up in prison, ending up dead, ending up dysfunctional, destitute? How do we stop this from happening? And I wondered because, people have made this a racially charged situation because the victim of the stabbing was Caucasian and the person who did the stabbing was black. And I couldn't help but to think if Carmelo Anthony had stabbed another black male, would he not be in prison? Would it have been the same kind of tension? And the answer to that is probably no. And what is it that we focus so much on the race and we're missing a lot of the life lessons and spiritual lessons that we need to focus on to make sure that this stops happening? Now, I've been an educator for over 30 years. I've spent the vast majority of my career now in the inner city of Atlanta. I have seen the best of behavior and I have seen the worst. And I've concluded that if we do not do something now, if we don't intervene and intercede for our young people, it is going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm also, because of my faith, because I'm an optimist, I believe that we can stop this from happening. And if we don't start focusing on solutions and focusing on answers, we're not going to get very far. And so we got to shift our focus. I get the emotion, the pain, the frustration, the anger. I understand all that. And while lamenting and crying can relieve us of some of that pain, but it doesn't change anything. Emotion does not transform situations. Constructive action, that where we can be clear-headed and we can be objective and we can strategize, that's how this is going to stop happening. And so I want to try to, throughout the episode, I'm going to try to pose some rhetorical questions to get us to think about what we need to be doing, not only as individuals, but as a collective, to save the lives of our young people who are truly, many of them are lost. Not everybody, I can tell you that, because I'm still in the classroom, and God willing, I'm going to teach another 2 or 3 more years. But I can tell you that all hope is not gone, because there are some students who are very focused, and I can tell you that they're going to do well. But how do we not let this happen again? And so I want to look at it from that lens. I want to focus on that. Unfortunately, we cannot reverse time. We cannot turn back the hands of time. What has happened has happened. It is sad. It's really unfortunate. And now we've got to figure out, where do we go from here? And I want to talk about solutions. Remember this, that trauma that is not transformed is transferred. Excuse me, that is not transformed is transferred. That a lot of this, whether when we start to pull back all the layer, has to do with trauma, individual trauma, racial trauma, a lot of trauma on both sides. And so we've got to figure out a way to heal so that we can create better futures and better circumstances for our young people. And so I want to get into it. At some point, I want to do a podcast on these teen takeovers. If you want to join me, just email me, let me know, because we've got to talk about our young people and we've got to talk about solutions. And so let's get started. I'm Cherie Hardy. Thank you so much for tuning into Bad Thought Therapy. As I said earlier, I'm a full-time educator. I do podcasting on the side, and I'm just sharing my thoughts, and I'm praying for this young man, and so and everybody involved. I feel really bad. I've spent my whole life advocating for children, serving children and their families, and I hate to see this happen. But I do believe if we will focus on the right things, we can stop this from happening in the future. So let's get started with this discussion. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me today. While I understand how important it is to have a chance to release your emotions, I also know that just an emotional release is not enough to change things in a constructive way. We can cry, we can grieve, we can lament, we can shout, we can scream, but nothing good is going to happen as a result of those actions. I understand that when we hurt, we should let people know when whatever we're feeling, it's good to get it out in constructive ways. But in this episode, what I want to do is try to talk about things that we must begin to teach our children. We must help them understand the world that they're living in. And even though this is a country where a black man can marry a white woman and not be lynched, this is still a country where, because you are black, you will be treated differently in many situations. You will be profiled. And that is a brutal reality. And so we have to teach our children how to navigate through all of that. And the other part that makes, living in this country very difficult, we get problems from both sides. We have issues within our own community, and then we have issues from outside. And so if we don't get it together and we don't find a way to heal and we don't find a way to transform our trauma and go beyond our fears and use our spiritual power, I'm afraid we're going to lose more young people than we have to. So let's talk about some things that we must teach our children. That's what I want to kind of focus on. I've been an educator for over 30 years. I've spent probably about 20 something years now in the inner city, serving the children in the inner city of Atlanta. I'm in a very challenged area. I thank God for the opportunity to be able to empower young people. And it's given me a worm's eye view of what's happening with our teenagers. And a lot of times when people, talk about teens and what's happening, They really don't understand it because their life is in a vacuum. I'm on the front lines. I'm in the trenches. I'm in a zip code where more people in our state federal prison come from. That's where they come from. They come from the zip code where I teach. So I think these are some life lessons. I'm not going to go back into time and say, can't Carmelo Anthony's parents, what did they teach them? What did the other child's parents teach him? These are things that moving forward, we need to make sure that our children know. Um, Number one, and I think this is so important, that your life really doesn't belong to you. Our lives belong to God. Everything that we do, everything that we say, everything that we believe has a spiritual root. And you must teach your children not religion, but relationship with God. That they must be mindful of spiritual things, how the spiritual realm works all day, every day. Because at the end of the day, that was what caused this situation to be what it is. The enemy, our spiritual enemy, and he is real, he wants to kill, steal, and destroy. He wants people to be in prison. He wants people to die, and we can't let him be the heavyweight champion of the world. Our children have to understand spiritual warfare, and they have to understand. And I'm not talking about religion. I want to emphasize that, because what's wrong with a lot of children and a lot of people is they're religious. They don't have a real relationship for themselves with the Most High God. That has to be personal. It has to be authentic. And it has to be God and not man that your relationship is with. And that's how people get jacked up. But we have to teach them how it works. We have to let them know that Satan is real and God is real, and that every day of their lives, that system, that spiritual system, that realm is operating. And be mindful of that when they see a person's behavior. It's not just a person, it's what's inside of that person. So they will know how to fight spiritually. I tell my students that, if you have a gun and you have a knife and you go to a fight, and the other person doesn't have it, the other person has a knife or a gun and you don't, it's going to be hard to win that fight. It's the same way in the spiritual realm. In the spiritual realm, you have people working against you, or entities working against you, and you don't have the tools and the weapons to shield yourself and to fight those spiritual battles, you're going to lose. And the enemy, all he wants is bad things to happen. That's the bottom line. You got to teach your children that all day, every day. Teach them how to pray. Teach them how to use their spiritual energy to sense danger. Don't walk toward the danger. Walk away from it. Be mindful of when they go into certain spaces and they're the only one or very few people looking like them are in those spaces, to know what to do and try to avoid evil, even though it's almost impossible to do. I do believe you can minimize your chances of dealing with tragic situations when you get away from when you get away from evil, when you get away from trouble. So you got to teach them that everything that we do affects somebody else. Everything that I do as a human being impacts somebody. My child, my family, my extended family members, my sibling, everybody's affected. My mother. Same thing with your children. You have to teach them that their decisions don't just impact them. It is distorted thinking to say, my life is my life and I can do what I want to do, and I don't have to do any, I can just kind of live the way I want to live. The problem with that kind of thinking is that you can't, because if something happens, it is your parents, it is your extended family that will have to come in to, get you out of the hospital, get you out of the prison, get you out of the morgue. Everybody's life is directly connected to somebody else's. In other words, we have to teach our children that their decisions don't just impact them. They have to be mindful of how this decision, if I do A, how A, when it turns to B, how is it going to impact the other people around me? Because they're the ones that have to have the money to bail me out or bury me. Like, you have to think like that. I remember growing up, and there was a story that I heard from somebody. It was a domestic violence situation where the woman was getting brutalized and she was getting abused. nobody from the man's family or her family would intervene because they had this sort of twisted thinking like, well, that's their business. The interesting thing is, though, if he had died or she had died, it would have been everybody's business because somebody would have had to bury them. And it's everybody's business because everybody's watching this. The children are being impacted by this. The children are suffering because of this. And yet they're saying, well, we can't say anything because, it's not our business. And it is your business. It's my business. If my daughter's doing something, it's my business because I'm the one that's going to be affected. I'm the one that's going to have to go to the jail or go to the cemetery or go. And I've taught my daughter that everything you do doesn't just impact you. Everything I do doesn't just impact me. When God created this earth, he never intended for humans to be independent. He created us to be interdependent. We are not going to make it in the way we can make it without community. Notice that in the word community, there is unity. We have to come together because what we're suffering from is we already dealing with the issues on the inside that we cannot fight the issues on the outside. And because we are dealing with our issues on the inside, there's a quote by the great historian Will Durant, and he says, a great civilization is not conquered from outside until it has destroyed itself from within. We as a group of people, and I thought about this, I said, if this young man had killed another black male, would there have been the same kind of attention and outrage and anger and all of this and protest? Would it have been the same? And you know what? The answer is probably not. And we need to value all black lives, and we need to value our children, and we need to start getting turned up when we see our own people kill each other. We gotta be concerned about that and figure out how to stop this. But because we got so many issues within our own community, we can't adequately deal with the issues that are outside of it. And so, but you gotta teach that to your children. You gotta make sure that they understand that we're community. I can't do anything without somebody else being impacted. Another person can't do anything without me being impacted, and that's what we got to teach them. The other thing is this, and this is tough. I was very mindful of trying to monitor situations when my daughter would be in extreme minority. There were before we moved to Atlanta. I was born and raised in Florida. But my parents separated when I was very young, so I spent, some of my childhood in Atlanta. But for the most part, I was living in Florida. And after college, after I graduated from college, I went back home. I went back to Florida. My daughter was in a situation where she was kind of in the extreme minority. And I had to kind of monitor that. And you want to monitor situations like that because a lot of times when they're in a situation like that, they're uncomfortable, and they can be targeted. And so one thing you don't want to do as a parent is you don't want to ever put your child in those extreme situations without, if you can help it, you need to be there, and you want to monitor that, and you want to constantly be checking in because unfortunately we can't go in those situations usually without something bad happening. People can come in our community and nothing's going to happen. And I talked about this, how one year at the school I was teaching we had this one Caucasian student. The whole population was African American. We had one white male. Do you know what happened to that young man? Absolutely nothing. That young man was treated with love and respect. He was taught, he was nurtured, he was protected, and nobody bothered him. And as I write my memoir about my experiences as a teacher, I often think, if the shoe on another foot, if it was a black child in an all white setting, would it have been the same way? And the answer is absolutely no. That child would have been harassed. That child would have been bullied. That child would have been targeted. And how do I know? Because I know history. And that's what we got to pay attention to. That's another powerful thing. You have to remember history in order to protect yourself. It doesn't mean that you teach your child, okay, this group of people is this way, that group of people is that way. Those are stereotypes, and they're very dangerous if you teach that. What you want to try to do is just let your children know that because of these patterns of behavior, you need to be mindful, not afraid. Be aware, not afraid. Be mindful and be cautious, and make sure as a parent you do your due diligence, and you keep an eye on things, and that you try to be there at all these different events. And I know that's hard, but have a representation. This is something that you must always do, whether it's a field trip, especially field trips, whether it is activities. I know my daughter, when she was in high school, well, she was in a lot of activities from elementary all the way up to high school, but she was a majorette in the band. She twirled the baton, and I was there at almost every game. I think I missed the whole 4 years. I think I missed one game. I was there, and I was there waiting on her for practice. You have to try to be there, and it does take a lot of work because you can monitor things, and the more eyes are on a situation, the better. They just never had. They were little conflicts, but we never had anything explosive because there were always parents and adults who were righteous enough to keep an eye on things, and nothing would have happened. And that's a powerful thing that we need to do too. Today, I'm just looking at solutions. I'm talking about things we can do to empower our young people, things that we need to tell them, things that we need to do as parents. Now, this is hard too. I've heard people talk about the lion and the lamb, and we all need to know when to let the lion roar and when to be like a lamb. And it's tough, but I say that the only time you should let that lion roar when it's a matter of life and death. And when your life is threatened, when someone has a gun on you, a knife on you, or when someone's trying to invade your home. Like, there are situations when it's time to be the lion, and you pray for the strength to be the lion and conquer and overtake whatever it is you need to overtake. But a lot of times we don't have to be the lion. And we got to teach our young people how to avoid or how to manage conflicts, because a lot of times what happens is there's a conflict, just a regular conflict, and it escalates. It escalates, and it's always going to escalate. Always, 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 when you're going into a heated verbal exchange. Anytime there's a back and forth and there is argument and bickering, it's always going to escalate into something worse, because somebody's going to say something, it's going to trigger something, and people are going to feel afraid, or they're going to feel intimidated or angry, or whatever the case may be. And so you got to learn how to teach your children to mind what they say and limit the words during heated situations, and don't say too much. If you got to say your piece, say it calmly and then let it go. Don't turn your back on anybody now, but you got to teach them how to not engage in arguments, and teach them how to say, look, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't feel like I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to lower myself to your standards or whatever. And then, and let it go, because it's only going to escalate. um I remember just last year, the year before last, I got a traffic ticket, and I hadn't gotten a traffic ticket in over 20 years. I'm like, my goodness. I'm driving to work, minding my business, and I'm getting in the middle lane to make a left turn. Now, mind you, I guess I was from that turn that I should have been, and the officer, I saw blue lights behind me, and I'm kind of shocked because I'm like, what did I do? Okay. And I move over to the right just naturally because, again, I hadn't gotten a ticket in over 20 years. I'm moving over to the right, but he's indicating to me, no, get back in the middle lane. And he's gesturing this in a very heated way. He seems very upset. I don't know how he did this, but he managed to stop me and another lady. Lady was in front of me. He went to her car first. She said something to him. So I said, okay, I could see how he was reacting. I'm not opening my mouth. And I still marvel to this day, I never uttered a sound to this officer. He asked me for my license, I gave it to him. He asked me for everything he asked for, I gave it to him. I took it back. He told me I could challenge the ticket. He told me I got a ticket for driving in the lane, which I had never heard of. And the date that he said, he gave me I found out the court date, and I was like, darn, I was already scheduled to go out of town, and I couldn't do it. But I said nothing. because I knew if I had gotten into some argument, kind of exchange, because the guy was already kind of upset, he seemed irritated and agitated. I'm going to start saying, well, why did you stop me? And will you let me go? Like, no, I did not open my mouth. That's what we got to teach our children, to learn that there are times when it's not worth it. The verbal exchange is not worth the consequences that can happen later, where there is a fight, where there is a injury, where there is death. This every day, all day, people get into exchanges and somebody gets hurt, somebody gets killed, and it could have been avoided, and it would have been less intense if there was just silence. Sometimes it's okay to be silent. Sometimes it's okay to let the other person get the last word. Let the other person win an argument for that day, so that later, and you do your spiritual work, when you feel that there's an injustice but you have not lost your life or you have not been injured, God will handle that. There's a story, and there's a case that I saw in the news. This when it happened years ago, not long ago, maybe 5 years ago. A young boy is in the back seat of the car. He's a mixed race child. His grandmother was Caucasian, and I think the driver was her friend, and she was Caucasian. This little black boy sitting in the car. They minding their business. They're driving down the road, the expressway, and all of a sudden the police stop them. And they start basically, with really not saying too much, arresting this boy and harassing this boy. And the grandmother saying, no, 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 this is my grandson. He's not bothering anybody. He hasn't done anything. This is my grandson. We're going to the store. Whatever she was saying, that little boy never opened his mouth. He said nothing. They tried to explain later when they realized, oh, this is what they tried to say. Well, this is what they always say. Well, we thought it was he was somebody called and said he was doing something and he fit the description. And the grandmother said no, and she was traumatized. She was more traumatized. He didn't say a word. That young man, and because he didn't say a word, and they realized, now mind you, they done roughed this boy up. They put him already in handcuffs, and he's just sitting there, innocent child. He's a child. But you know what? Because he didn't say anything, and I'm not saying that this works all the time, because sometimes you can cross every T and you can dot every I, and these demons are just relentless. However, more than likely, there's a time when your hand is in the lion's mouth, you ease it out and you don't say anything, because a verbal exchange is going to make it worse. This young man, he sat in that car. Next thing you know, they taking the handcuffs off of him, and they're trying to explain why they pulled him over. They just pulled him over because they saw a black boy in the back seat of a car with two white old ladies. And this grandmother is pleading and telling them no. And they're not even listening to her at first, but because he didn't move, he didn't say anything, they couldn't say too much. They couldn't do too much. She's doing the talking for him, and she should have. He's a minor. But then I've seen it, and I'm not saying that anybody is justified in being hurt because they do say something or they do respond to somebody physically assaulting them. But I'm telling you that you have to teach your child that sometimes just letting stuff go is the way to save your life. Because when you don't let stuff go, and you become like a volcano, every time somebody says something to you, you have to let it go. A lot of times, too, we have to stop talking. I noticed that after this verdict in the Karmelo Anthony case, the parents on both sides are talking. The young man who was killed, his parents are talking, and Karmelo Anthony's parents are talking. And the Carmelo Anthony's parents, I don't know who their legal advisor is or counsel is, but they should tell them to stop talking. They should not talk at this point. They should decline all interviews. They should not talk at all. They should have a moment of reflection. The more they say, the more it could jeopardize an appeal or something in the future. Like, just be silent now. And now it should be a time of reflection. And now you should be in your deep spiritual mode, and y'all should be, trying to strategize and figure out, and going to God and trying to figure out how to what the solution is going to be, because their son is in jail, in prison, and unless there is an appeal, and he gets a lesser charge, he's not getting out for a long time. So now you got to figure out, okay, now we got to focus on trying to protect him. Now we got to focus on making sure he has his needs and understand. In one interview, I think I saw he was having seizures and he need, all you got to be focusing on that now and keeping him in a good mental state and watching what's happening to him rather than you doing interviews and crying and talking about what you should have done and could have done. It cannot be reversed. That's the thing about when we make a mistake. And let this be a life lesson. When we make a mistake, we can never go back and undo it. When we do something that causes pain to ourselves and others, we can never say, I'm going to go back into time and change it. It won't happen. Now, what we have to do, since it's already been done, we have to focus on redemption. How do we make the thing that we've done wrong, how do we make it right? How do we reconcile? How do we heal all the positive things that need to happen so that it doesn't happen again? Because it's happening. I'm going to do a podcast about these teen takeovers because I'm seeing some very disturbing things. And a lot of young people, and what's going to happen, and they're doing it now, more parents are going to be charged for their children's behavior. Because if your children are just out in the street, your children have weapons, your children are being violent, your children are tearing up people's businesses, and God knows what else, you're going to be charged because they're a minor. Because why are they out there? Why are they doing ABC? And you have to help your children understand their own development. The human brain is not fully developed until you're about 25 or 26 years old. I remember when the brain, I'm over 60, and I remember when more people started researching the brain. Scientists were trying to figure out, why is it that when you're a teen, you will make certain choices and do certain things that you probably wouldn't do if you were 35 or 40 years old. What they found out is the part of the brain that deals with decision making is the last part of the brain to fully develop. That is why children have to trust adults, and they have to be dependent upon the wisdom of adults, and they have to believe adults when they tell them, if you do A, B is going to happen, so don't do A. If you walk over here, then walking over there is going to create more problems for yourself. And they have to understand that's why you're telling them. We're not beamed from the sky like aliens. We come from God through people. We have a mother and father for a reason. They're supposed to teach us wisdom. They're supposed to give us the information that we need to navigate through life. Life is hard. Life can be beautiful, but life is very, very hard. And, when you're raising children, everything you say to them, everything you expose them to, it has an effect on them. And it's tough because you don't want to give too much. You don't want to give too little. You want to make sure you say the right things. You want to make sure you don't miss out on saying something that needs to be said. I would oftentimes use news stories as cautionary tales about this is what's going to happen, because as a child, you're telling them the consequence, but they don't have the cognitive ability to fully conceptualize those consequences. So you have to show them these news stories. Use the Karmelo Anthony story to teach them what will happen if you use a weapon and nobody else has a weapon, or you in a situation where you're fighting someone as a black male, you may be given a harsher sentence. Use this as a springboard to save their lives. That's all we can do right now, because we cannot undo what has already been done. But you got to teach them, because they really cannot conceptualize it cognitively. So you have to show them. I would use movies. I remember when I first moved to Atlanta, we would be driving around town, and I'm in the hood where I taught in the hood, and I still teach in the hood, and we would see these posters of Scarface, and people would have on shirts with Al Pacino on it, and I'm thinking, why do I keep seeing these posters of Scarface and people wearing shirts? Because they saw Al Pacino's character as a hero. But when I sat down and I showed the movie to my daughter, I showed her how that was a tragedy. See, and again, what people don't know, I had my business. At a certain point, I left teaching for a while and had a business. And I wanted to put my business in the hood because I wanted to make an impact. And we did. We made a lot of good memories, didn't make a lot of money. And what I learned though from that experience was there are two different kinds of Black Americas. And the different Americas depend on the value systems that we have, that we live by. Because all of us, again, it's spiritual. Everything, though, let's go back to the root cause of everything, is spiritual. Your value system is based on how you see yourself in a spiritual context, your thoughts, your emotions, what you believe is right and wrong, what you would do or not do, is all based on your view of God and how you see yourself through that lens. If you do not see yourself as accountable to God, if you do not see yourself as there's going to be a consequence for you doing evil. And how do you know it's evil? Well, if it's hurting somebody, it's not God. If it's going to destroy something, it's not God. If it's going to limit you, it's not of God. With religion, you got a whole bunch of rules and people can't follow them, so they just throw their hands up in the air and they give up. I don't teach religion. I try to teach relationship, because when you have a real relationship with God and you start talking to God and listening to God and meditating and fellowshipping with God, right or wrong will be so clear. You will understand, I'm not supposed to do this because this is going to cause pain, not only for me, but for others. I can't go here because going here creates a conflict and it can cause harm for me and for others. It's that simple. But when you're dealing with religious people, they got rules that they cannot follow, and their misuse and their abuse of the Bible is the problem. It's not the Bible, but the way they're using the Bible in the wrong way is causing so many people to go astray and to get lost. And that's why we have to teach our children the truth. You got to teach them that they got to have the right value system, because I have seen it where, I'm like I said, the Scarface thing, they looking at that character as a hero when actually that movie is a tragedy. It's about a man who amasses only one thing, and that is money, but nothing else, and dies and makes no contribution to this world. And that's what you got to teach them. Everybody is put on this planet to do one thing, and that is to make this world the best place it can be. How it's done will vary from person to person. I try to do it as an educator. I try to do it as a writer and a speaker. Somebody else may do it in the field of medicine. Somebody may do it as an attorney. Somebody may do it as a dentist. We all have a role to play. But we're not put on this earth just to live a carnal life and then die. We are put on this earth to do something that has meaning. And that is another powerful lesson that you must teach your child from sun up to sundown, that they're just not here to have fun and to play around. There's a time for everything. There is a time to enjoy life and play and relax and all those things and watch movies. But what we really should all be doing is working with a sense of purpose to empower people, to uplift people, to elevate people. We must do that, and you got to teach that, because you got a lot of young people, they just kind of going through the motions. They don't know why they're here, and then no one has told them about life, and then you expect it. They have certain expectations on you when you become a certain age, and they're not prepared. I remember as a teacher when I first came here, before I came to Florida, I mainly taught in middle school. When I got to Georgia, in my first class graduated from high school, it was like I noticed that some of the kids were not happy. And I'm thinking, wow, it's graduation. Why are they not happy? They're getting ready to go to college, go to the military or something. What I realized is that many of those children had squandered those 4 years. They had played around and they realized, oh, now I'm 18 and I'm expected to get out here and try to make it, and I'm not prepared. And even when you get out here and work hard, it takes a lot, especially now, to make enough money to have a place to stay, to purchase all the things you need, gas and food and electricity and all these things. It costs a lot, but they're not prepared. And since they don't know how to work as community, remember, unity is in the word community. Since they're not working together, and that's another thing you have to teach your children, to be together, to work together when you see your friend, messing up. Say like, hey, come on over here, son. Come over here, bro. Let's go. We ain't got to do this. Let's just leave. That's what we got, a community where we support one another, we help one another, we save one another. And you have to teach that directly, because children just don't automatically know things. Remember, you're not beamed out of the sky. You come through human beings. Human beings are supposed to teach you what you need. And if you don't teach them community and say, hey, look, don't do that. I, as a fully adult person, there have been times when I'm talking to somebody, a coworker, and they're, saying, hey, if she says one more thing to me, I'm going to knock upside the head. You got to say, no, don't do that. You need your job. That's not worth that. You ain't got to quit your job. You don't have to do this. It's not worth it. That's what we got to teach our children, rather than what I'm seeing on some of these videos, where you have one child from our community and another child from our community getting brain damage because they're literally beating each other. They're assaulting each other. And they find joy and pleasure out of filming it. When I saw somebody just was reposting something about the Shanquilla Robinson case, and the first time the case, surfaced that I heard about it, I was just devastated. I don't think I did a podcast. Yeah, I think I did a podcast. This was a while ago. I was just devastated. And when I saw the video where, part of the video where she's being assaulted, she's being beaten, and she's not fighting back, someone in the background was like really trying to encourage her to fight, and she wouldn't. And my heart just, oh God, it grieved, it hurt to know that that person was finding pleasure watching her, wanting to, seeing that as entertainment while this girl is being beaten in her head. And another thing you got to teach people the science, as humans, we're not meant to fight. I did a lot of study on CTE when people first started talking about this. A lot of my, when I first started teaching here, I taught 25 years, almost 20 years at a school where we had quite a few athletes to go on to college and D1 schools, and some of them went to the professional leagues. And I started studying about CTE, and what I learned is that the human brain is not able to take pounding. So when you're seeing these fighting and you're seeing people get hit in the head, our brain, even if they survive that situation, it is very likely they can have brain damage later. We have to teach our children we're not animals. We cannot take those punches and that violence, and God does not want us to fight. And that's the part that people miss, is that anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. God does not want us to resolve all our problems and all our conflicts through violence, and people don't know. And I saw that little girl, she was being beaten. And then you don't know that people have, medical conditions that they're not going to expose that to the public. But let's just say someone has a heart condition or they have asthma. And then this man on the video in Shanquilla Robinson's case, sick, filthy sick, warning her, saying, you're not going to fight. And she's saying no. And they all conspired against it. That's the part that makes it pure evil. It is demonic that they found pleasure out of filming that. They set her up so they could film that and then get a laugh out of saying, oh, she got beat. And it's just sick. You go on vacation with people you think are your friends, but then your parents have to get your body in a body bag. That's evil. And that was black on black. And we keep talking about the racially charged stuff, but we got to do something where you have a culture of people that find that as pleasure, as entertainment, when it is sick, it is shameful, it is evil. But teach your children that, whether you on either side of that, there are physiological consequences when you fight. Because when you get in some kind of physical altercation, again, you may survive it, but your brain, the way we're made, we're not like animals. We're not meant to fight. Sometimes because I'm a naturalist and I love nature, and I see animals doing a better job of taking care of their children and teaching their children. Animals being more peaceful. in the wild than human beings. And we say that we have progressed as humans, that we've made advances. No, we made advances in technology, but in terms of our humanity, we have not made any advances. And see, another thing is, we've marched and we've cried and we've shouted. And what has it done? Absolutely nothing. Even though a black man in this country can go out and marry a white woman, and he does 5 times more than anybody else, this country, you're still dealing with a lot of that tension because of racial trauma. You're still having to deal with that. And that's why we have to make sure that we teach our children when they're in certain spaces, they need to be reminded that because of those tensions, they need to be careful. They need to do everything they can to avoid some kind of conflict. We can't be afraid. We have to be aware. We can't allow fear to be stronger than our faith. And then we have to also, again, it's complex because we got to be reminded that everybody from another race is not our enemy. Everybody is not a bad person outside of our race. Same thing within our race. Everybody is not good. And that's what makes life so hard. But you teach your children that use these examples so that they don't end up losing their lives. And these teen takeovers, what I'm seeing is a lot of violence, and it's not of God. When you hurt people, when you destroy people's things. And I'm just afraid that somebody is going to hurt some of our children because they're just out there. And this is what's going to happen. If it does happen that way, nobody's going to have empathy for them. That's the thing, when we use the Bible as a guidebook from Genesis to Revelations, one of the principles of the Bible is that you must be found blameless, meaning that you must make sure that you have done everything right. Because even if you've done everything right, something bad can still happen. But you try your best to make sure you've done everything right so you can be found blameless, because it makes it more difficult to then persecute you. And that's something that you have to teach our children. Teach your children that they are called to walk by faith and not by sight. Teach them to nurture that spiritual part, because in the end, that is what's going to determine what they do. That's what is going to determine if they're going to be free or in prison. That's going to be determined how high or how low they go. At the end of the day, we don't come from people, we come through them. God wants us to live and to have life more abundantly. He wants us to have peace. He wants us to have joy, and we can't have it separate from him. And it doesn't matter where you go, whether you're in your house, whether you're on your job, when you're traveling. And again, there's no utopia, so you can try to do everything right, but you want to make sure that that's the part, and that you keep your anger and your emotions checked, because if you let you rule by your emotions, the consequences are always going to be bad. These are some of the things, and I could go on, that we have to teach our children. The other thing is community. When you see a friend messing up, going the wrong way, pull them back in. Hey, look, bro, let's not do that. Let's come on over here. Let's get over here, because this is not worth it. If it's not life and death, and it sounds passive, but one of the things I'm over 60 and I've learned to do is I truly learned to let God fight my battles. If it's not a physical situation, like somebody could call me a name or insult me or say something to me, guess what? If it's not a matter of life and death, I know I've seen it up close and personal. God will handle people. He will deal with people in a way you could never imagine. You could never outdo him. And that's what you have to understand, because sometimes being the lamb saves your life. Last but not least, I want to, this is a very painful situation. Karmelo Anthony's family, the other family, the community, everybody's all tense right now. We've got to move beyond our emotions. We have already, our ancestors, many of them, they marched and they protested, and they have some rights on paper. But here's what we never did, and we never can do. We never changed the hearts and the minds of people. Only God can change a person's heart or mind. And that's what we got to start doing. We have to start praying for healing, not just to be able to integrate in certain spaces, but so that we can be in our own spaces in peace and they can be in their own spaces in peace. And we gotta ask God to help us to heal, because and to heal minds and hearts. There is something very spiritual that a person can say they love the God that they cannot see, but they hate the brown people that God made. There's something wrong with that, where you hate people. People. I tell you, we've got different people moving in the neighborhood, and my neighborhood has always been integrated. And these people are just nasty neighbors. And I know they pray to God. I know they believe that Jesus Cristo, it just loves them, and they love Jesus Cristo. But guess what? They hate the people that Jesus Cristo loves, the ones that God made. That's what I find so amazing. And that's what we got to pray for, that people's hearts will see you first as a human being. And that if there is any kind of harmony that can take place, we need to let it take place. I believe in having a racial pride without hating other people. There's a way you can love your people and support your people, but don't have any hate, don't have any resentment of anybody else. And it's the same too for them, to love their people without having any hate for anybody else. We're not going to get there without God. And we have to continue the spiritual work. And I'm in a lot of prayer. I'm in a lot of prayer. And I ask that you pray that healing takes place, but teach our children. Use this story. There's so many other stories out there. Use this story to teach them that they must walk with God. They must walk with God. And anger and resentment and fear and all of those emotions only lead to pain. They only lead to destruction. And so just don't forget that. Here's a scripture that I came across in Proverbs. I was thinking about Dr. Carson when he talked about, after he almost stabbed he did stab his classmate, but the knife went, I think, into the belt buckle. He said he read the book of Proverbs. And the book of Proverbs is a very powerful book for life lessons. And I do recommend any young person, middle-aged, old person, start from the beginning and just keep reading. But here's a scripture that I found that I thought that I would end with. It says, "Do not envy a violent man or choose any of his ways." And that was Proverbs 3:3. And and it's hard sometimes. We're humans. We get emotional. And yes, anger is a real emotion that you should have sometimes. But how you respond to anger, what you do with your anger, what you do with your frustration, what you do with your disappointment, that's what can become sin. And that's what we got to teach our children, that to have anger is not bad. You use that anger for righteousness, and teach them that it's not that, as a human you may be afraid, but you can't hurt somebody else or hurt yourself because you're afraid. Like, we have to teach we have to have real conversations. Your children should be at home, and you should be talking to them every day, all day. They shouldn't be out in the streets tearing up people's businesses and fighting one another and harming themselves by eating and drinking and smoking and doing all these things that long term are going to hurt them. And it's true that wisdom does begin with the fear of the Lord. People just tell themselves these lies like it's their life, and they can do what they want to do, and they can respond how they want to respond. But here's the thing: I cannot take my next breath without God's permission. You cannot take your next breath without God's permission. Our lives really don't belong to us. They belong to the Lord. Our lives don't belong to us. We're given a date of birth, and we're given a date of death. And while we have this time on this earth, we should use it to build and not destroy. We should use it to help and not hurt. That's what we're here for. And everybody's going to do that in a different way, but you have to teach that to your children and remind them they have a future. Remind them they don't want to be in that box, in that cage that was really created for them, so that we don't have this happen again. Well, this concludes this episode. I pray that this episode made you think about the things that we need to teach our young people, even if you're not a parent, even if you're not a teacher, even if you don't work with young people. I want to encourage you to find a way, if you are righteous, to work with them, because they need good mentors. They need good role models. Teaching and telling are two different things. One of the things that we have to do in our community is model. As a parent, that's a challenge because our children emulate us, whether we want them to or not. They emulate the people around them. And it's very important for us not just to tell them to do certain things, but to teach them through modeling and creating those good examples for them and pointing to good examples. And I just want to talk a little bit too about, in general, there's a lot of promotion of people in an industry that promote things that are very destructive. Our children oftentimes are listening to music that elevates, being a criminal and thugism and violence and alcoholism and drug abuse and misogyny and sex without love. A lot of that is a major part of what is elevated intentionally in our community. And I say don't remove that. I say use that to teach our children, because if you did what these rap lyrics tell you to do, you're going to end up in prison. You're going to end up dead. You're going to end up hurt, end up in a place where you don't want to be. And so that's another thing. And I want to end with this. We have to teach our children to be mindful about what they're putting in them, because whatever you put in them, whatever you put in yourself is the only thing that can come out. As a teacher, my students, they often laugh because I'm oftentimes drinking water and I have a water bottle in my hand, and I do this little demonstration where I will pour the water out onto one of my plants. And I do this thing where I ask them, okay, well, what came out of that bottle? Was it tea? Was it lemonade? Was it orange juice? And everybody say no. And the only thing that came out of that bottle was water, because that's the only thing that's in it. And then I use that as a lesson to say, we are just like that bottle. We are a vessel. If you fill yourself with content that glorifies violence, violence is going to come out of you. It's going to be right on the surface. Whatever you're listening to, whatever you're watching, whatever you're reading, whomever you're around, that will affect whatever you put in you. Is the only thing that can come out. So you want to remind people of that. The music that the industry makes, it sounds good, but oftentimes it's not good. The messages are not good. And when children listen to that over and over again, and they got this beat, and then they got the visual of it, then you put the visual, you put the beat, sometimes you're not realizing how it's getting inside of you, whether you know it or not. You're internalizing these lyrics and what you're hearing because of how the brain works. The brain stores whatever it is it hears, whatever it is we see. And it could be deep or it could be right on the surface. And so we want to be mindful of that. Remind your children that they've got to monitor what they listen to and what they watch. And that's for us too as adults, and I'm going to do prayerfully soon an episode on the Shannon Sharp situation. And it's not to be condemning, it's not to judge our brother, but it's to teach a powerful lesson that, again, what you watch and what you listen to and the people that you're around have a major influence on what you're going to do. And so we want to be mindful that we are equally yoked, that when we're walking with God, we're around people who are spiritually minded too, and that we can talk about these things, and iron sharpens iron, and we can encourage one another. Because when I see these stories in the news where people are in these violent confrontations, that anger was right on the surface. It was inside of them. But not only that, it was right on the surface. And so just anything, even if nobody did anything, it's like that triggers it to just come out and bubble to the surface and erupt like a volcano. And that's why you see a lot of these like volcanic emotional eruptions, because it's already in them and they haven't dealt with it. We have to learn how to work through some things. And that old saying that trauma that is not transformed is transferred. And that's what happens. A lot of this trauma, we cannot stop people from doing what they do, but we can determine how we're going to respond to it. And so these people are making all kinds of media that our children are exposed to, and that affects them. And I see it up close and personal. It is having a direct impact on their behavior and what they believe. And so we got to teach them that that stuff is fabricated. It's not real, it's made up. Those people that sing those lyrics, they don't really live that way. Because if they lived that way and some of them are found out, they would be in prison. They would be dead. They would be maimed and they would be injured. So you want to teach them that as well. I could keep going, but I'm going to conclude this episode. I want to thank you for listening to Bad Thought Therapy. And if this video in some kind of way helped you, please like it and also subscribe to my budding YouTube channel. They say it helps. It only takes you a couple of seconds. Peace and blessings. Thank you.